So thanks to everyone who has joined so far. Really excited to be sharing this webinar with you all. This is another webinar that we're doing here during this time of social distancing. And we're looking forward to covering this topic because it's something that we know quite a bit about here at WorldViz. It's something we've been working with a lot in the last few years, is this concept of multi-user VR for remote collaboration and professional and academic contexts. So we're excited to jump into this topic, and I'll go ahead and I'll introduce the speakers that we'll be having today. So on our side here at WorldViz, we've got Matthias Pusch. He's our CEO and VP of Sales and Marketing. Matthias is a material scientist and was also a McKinsey consultant, and he is a co-founder of WorldViz. He's been working in the VR space for almost 20 years. Then we've also got Seda Rabouti, who is our Vizible VR software product manager. Seda also is really big on the biz dev side and works with a lot of our partner companies who are providing things like, data gloves and biofeedback. So he's a really excellent resource in terms of how our tools connect to all of these peripherals across the industry. Then we've also got Felix Reuter, who is our VizMove product manager. He's also one of our chief hardware engineers. So Felix is really responsible for a lot of our proprietary hardware, such as our motion tracking technology. And then I've got myself over here. My name's Dan Tinkham. I'm the head of sales for Americas. I've been here with WorldViz almost 6 years now. And so really excited. It's been an awesome ride to see VR kind of grow and become a household name over the last half a decade or so. And we're excited to share some of our insights with you guys today. So I'm just going to go over a little bit of what we're looking forward to talking to about. We've got the first topic is going to be, what is remote collaboration? How do we define it in VR? Why would you want to use it? And, what is it really good for? The next thing is that we'll be covering is the professional applications of VR. So we've got meetings and coordination, sales and marketing, training and education. That's going to be pretty much a deep dive into these different case studies. We'll have some other folks come in and talk about hardware and software considerations for getting started. And after that, we'll actually be giving a live demo of our software. So that's going to be a full experience where we've got Seda, Felix, and myself will all be joining. And I realized I wasn't sharing my screen for the first couple minutes here, so let me just give you guys a quick look at who our presenters are. So here we're going to jump in just a little bit on the WorldViz side. So we at WorldViz, we've been working in the virtual reality space for nearly 20 years now. Started out really as a academic focused company. We came out of a lab at UC Santa Barbara, and early on we were doing a lot of work in the academic space and also in the kind of high-end engineering and aerospace areas. So you can see just kind of from our selected WorldViz customers here, where we've been working. The really cool thing about the last 4 or 5 years is that as consumer headsets have become more readily available, it's made this industry a lot more accessible to other businesses and also a lot more labs as well. So traditionally, a virtual reality system costs anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, and now you can go down to Best Buy and get an incredibly powerful headset and tracking system for between $400 and $1,200. So it's really become a totally different world in terms of what the accessibility of this technology from a cost perspective. And that's been really awesome to see that, because now we can actually access these different industries too. I'll get into that a little bit more in just a second. Just to give you guys some background, this is going to be a really generalized broadcast. We're not going to be focusing too much on our own products beyond just, giving you some insight into how we work. But to give you guys an idea of what we do just as a business, we have 2 proprietary software platforms. One is a multi-user remote collaboration software called Vizible. That's the one that will probably be addressed a little bit today. We have a second one called Vizible, which is a rendering engine effectively that's really focused on research. It uses Python as its primary language. So those are our 2 kind of software pieces, and we also do integrated hardware. So we have some proprietary hardware, specifically a motion tracking system, but we also integrate with a lot of third-party pieces. So we really get to touch pretty much every piece of hardware in the industry just for what we do as a systems integrator. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of where we're coming from. Definitely a lot of experience on the software side, but also really getting our hands dirty on the hardware side as well. So it's you know, nice position to be in to see where things are going. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump into what is remote collaboration in VR. And really the simplest way that I could explain it is anytime you're connecting and communicating in a 3D virtual space. That means, you know, whether you're using a desktop, whether you're using a cell phone, if you've got some kind of 3D space that's navigable, that you are also communicating with another person live in, that is remote collaboration in VR. Definitely the kind of remote collaboration in VR that we work with is going to involve some kind of an immersive hardware. So something like a headset or a 3D projection system. Those are really going to give you a much more sincere sense of presence in this virtual environment. And especially if you have multiple people wearing headsets and talking with each other, you're really having that kind of face-to-face interaction with each other. So what we've oftentimes used remote VR for in the past is actually an augmentation to an in-person meeting. So we'll go and bring a system to a client site, and then we'll actually have one of our presenters who didn't travel to that client site back home at the headquarters going in and giving a presentation to 3 or 4 people simultaneously, right? And then there's another person on the ground who is facilitating that meeting. So that's a really common setup for us. But obviously in these days of the coronavirus pandemic, really relying more on it as a complete substitute to face-to-face meetings has become a lot more common. And that's something that we've been doing for a long time as well. So you can go either way. And really, you know, it depends on the context. But just knowing that it's available to you is, I think, a good first step. The question might come up is, why would I want to use remote collaboration in VR? And for us, the kind of bar that we set is if whatever the meeting you're having has something to do with an evaluation or interaction with spatial information. And what I mean by that is if there's some kind of layout that needs to be done, some kind of product that's being reviewed, whether it's a design review or if you're showing it to a new client, anything that's going to have some kind of spatial element to it, that's where virtual reality and multiple users in virtual reality becomes really valuable. The secondary thing is if you want to have a physical meeting, but it's not practical because, you know, maybe there's travel restrictions, maybe you're just trying to save money on travel across, you know, for airline fare. And that's when you can actually have a meeting in VR where you've got physical presence with another person, so you can see where they're looking, you can see how they're moving. And then that's really giving you guys a nice way to have a substitute for a traditional physical meeting. The final thing is kind of a funny thing about VR is that there's a really high level of engagement with an audience when they're in a VR headset. And the reason for that is because there's no other distractions when you're in a VR headset. You're literally wearing this headset and it's all you can see. You can't pull out your cell phone. So when we say there's a high level of engagement, it's because you're literally, that's your entire world is when you're in that headset. So if you're having a one-on-one conversation with a person, it's really kind of a pretty cool experience to have that high level of engagement. This is kind of a way that I was thinking we'd want to frame this kind of next series of topics here, which is why wouldn't I use VR for everything? And I think this is an important question to ask yourself because early on in the sort of explosion of VR technology, people had this tendency to say VR is going to be the solution for everything, right? But the reality of the situation is that VR is a specific tool with specific value. And, you know, you should just ask yourself before starting or kind of pursuing a VR for remote collaboration experience is there an existing platform or technology that's already giving me a really good value for what I'm trying to do, right? For example, the question, is a phone call or a website not enough already? So, potentially online shopping might not be fully augmented by a virtual reality headset, or just having a regular business call isn't necessarily always going to want to be replaced by virtual reality. So I think just asking yourself that question is really a good litmus test for whether or not it's important to pursue this virtual collaboration. Definitely, if you're doing something along the lines of, spatial navigation, that's where you're starting to see the real value. Also, just as a heads up, as you might understand, there is a higher level of complexity. Hardware can be a barrier to entry for many. So this is actually a picture from a couple of years ago showing an Oculus CV1, the consumer version 1. So you can see there's actually, we've got 2 sensors here, and it's already become more simplified than that because the new Oculus, you've got the ability to have this headset tracking the world around it. But, just as a heads up, it is a more complex hardware setup, and that can be a barrier to entry. Then also, there are really interesting free platforms out there. I actually use Mozilla Hubs to meet with people just as friends. And, that's super simple to use to get a bunch of people in the same space. But if you're really looking to do a more specific targeted virtual reality meeting, the kind of work that we do directly with our clients, there's going to be cost and time to develop that content. So those are just all kind of, heads up about this space before you get into it. So I'm going to go ahead and send out the first poll here. We just love to learn a little bit more about who you all are, and that would help us a lot. So if you guys don't mind jumping in and giving us a little bit of feedback on the poll at this point, that really kind of helps us. We can also tailor our message a little bit. One thing that I meant to mention on the earlier slide is that we are taking all of your questions right now. If you guys had a chance to join our last webinar, what we like to do is we actually like to pull as many of the questions as we can and actually add them to the end of the first slide. So right at the end, we'll do a full Q&A session, and we'll actually show your guys questions on the slide, and we'll do our very best to answer as many of them as we can while we're live. So I think if you guys have any questions at any point throughout this, and don't worry, we can totally come back and jump back in time to an earlier topic and talk about that. That is totally easy for us. So feel free to submit your questions as much as you like. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now and send it out. Looks like we have 31% academic research, 15% architecture, engineering, and construction, 18% industrial and manufacturing, 5% healthcare, and then 32% other. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for participating. I really appreciate it. We'll go ahead. We'll jump into the next couple of topics here, which is looking at actual business use cases. So the first one here is VR for remote meetings. You might just ask yourself, is this a good substitute for just meeting one-on-one, right? If I'm going to have a team tag up, does it make sense to do VR? Some of the really cool things already mentioned a little bit is that face-to-face style communication. When you're in a fully tracked VR headset with hands and head controller, you actually get a real sense of physical presence with the people around you. So you can, when you're talking with people, you can see where their head's pointing, you can see how the kind of stance that they're in. So you really get this richer social interaction just from that kind of physical, being able to use your hands. I use my hands to gesture a lot when I'm talking. And in VR, it's really facilitated that kind of physical communication as well. One thing that's really cool, this is a screenshot from Mozilla Hubs. You guys might have been on a big Zoom meeting, either with your company or even, we've been doing it with my big family here, where everybody's talking over each other. There's 25 faces on screen. It's really kind of hard to get people to take turns to talk. What virtual reality does is, because it has an element of physical locality, you get localized and directional sound. So you can have in these larger virtual spaces, breakout spaces for large groups. So it's kind of like you can have a virtual event, a virtual mixer. So we've been doing that for birthday parties lately, where we're having people come together and, you know, a bunch of friends, and people can break out, and rather than having to take turns talking on a Zoom, you can actually have these little localized group conversations. So another thing is that just to kind of give you guys a heads up, with Mozilla, you're joining with the desktop, so you don't have that kind of rich physical space. You have to just be an avatar with without arms and hands. It's kind of fun. You can actually share different types of media. So we'll show a little bit of that when we do our live demo about how you can bring in videos, how you can bring in PDFs and things like that to really give you this sort of immersive experience of sharing content. Let me go ahead to the next one here. This is, I think, you know, VR for remote for coordination. When you're planning physical layouts, this is really, you know, talking to our architecture, engineering, and construction folks on the phone here, as well as anybody who's working in the healthcare industry or industrial and manufacturing. This is really where we consider almost the low-hanging fruit of VR. The ability to go into a CAD model, into a scanned environment, to evaluate an as-built space, or to bring in your end users and actually have them walk through a facility before it's completed. There's huge value in that, just because you're able to catch things early on in the design process. We have customers who use our remote collaboration tool as a product design review. So it's actually like a shoe company can use it to view all of their products throughout the product lifecycle. They can see the designs while they're still in the computer. Then when they send the designs over to their manufacturing base, those folks can actually scan the first prototypes as they come off the line and then share them back with the home office. So there's eliminating the need for unnecessary travel and really getting the ability to kind of have a hands-on review process. We're also seeing the scanning technology is a huge leap forward for VR because it's really shortcutting the way that, you know, the traditional kind of bottlenecks for content creation. Just being able to scan a real world object and have that as a prop in the environment is awesome. And Sato is going to talk a little bit more about that with the photogrammetry process in a second here. This is another major growth area. I would say VR for training. Traditionally, you're going to have a VR experience that for training is going to more likely be an individual setting, especially with the work that we've done in like these kind of large retail contexts. Just in terms of volume, you want to address a lot of people simultaneously. Having an individualized self-running program is the more traditional way. But if you're really focusing on, is there a process, you know, for emergency responders, do we need to work together as a team? Having the ability for multiple people to join the same space simultaneously is huge, right? Because oftentimes in these kind of emergency contexts and in these sort of mission critical spaces, we're going to have to be working together as a team, right? And being able to replicate that in a virtual reality space without having to put people in actual danger or to simulate real danger is really an awesome ability of this technology. One thing that is cool about VR training is that you have a high retention for the experience that you're doing because you're actually physically doing these processes, right? So this is just an old demo that we've always shown of the helicopter rotor disassembly, but you know, you literally have a physical model of a helicopter and you're taking it apart piece by piece. So there's this ecological validity rather than going through like a textbook or watching a video. You have to take your hand and actually pull the piece apart, right? It's not the same as if you've got a tool in your hand, but at the same time, it's definitely better than if you're just reading about something. Another kind of interesting idea of how we would bring the remote training context here is that if you've got subject matter experts who are distributed across the country, across the world, you can actually have them join specific training sessions. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind is, you know, if I can really like call in the expert here to talk about something, then what kind of value does that have for me in terms of, you know, passing on that knowledge? this is kind of the last piece that I'll talk about here before handing it over to Sato. But the remote VR for sales and marketing, this is a space that I think we work in the most in terms of how we're using remote collaboration, especially on the healthcare sector. We work with a lot of companies that are medical device manufacturers, and what they do is they have very expensive equipment that is very particular in the way that it's set up in an operating room, and using virtual reality to really, first and foremost, showcase and educate potential clients about their products, and then also to create layouts to optimize, a planned operating room or something with the end users. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch for these healthcare device manufacturers, where they're able to really communicate what the value of their products are. And we see that, across many different industries in terms of, on the manufacturing side, people doing walkthroughs of, cars, planes, trains, all sorts of things along those lines. Being able to showcase a large and hard to communicate product in a really immersive context has a lot of value for folks. What we've done a lot in the past is and definitely in the past, obviously, because it's a trade show, but we used to bring a bunch of headsets to trade shows and actually have multi-user remote sessions there on the trade show floor, where we'd have a presenter back at our headquarters in Santa Barbara coming in and talking through all the different tools and solutions that we offer, just so people who are passing by could actually get a hands-on demo, both with the virtual reality technology, but then also with the larger scale systems that we sometimes build, these large projection systems and things like that. So it's a really useful tool for that, being able to communicate a large space, and then sending that out on the road, whether or not it's accompanied by a person. These days, you can actually just send a system on its own and have a meeting remotely with somebody. The last thing I'll say is that, when you're in virtual reality, you're creating this unique experience. It really is a memory that you're walking away with. So having that from a marketing perspective, if you're creating an event, like I mentioned, there's ways that you can have these large social mixers where multiple people are coming in. You can have breakout sessions. So if we're looking at ways for substituting live events, virtual reality is providing a really exciting option for that. You'll also see we've been doing some interesting filming from home lately, where we'll actually have one person wearing a VR headset or multiple people wearing a VR headset and filming our screens, so that you can actually see our first-person perspective. And it's a really exciting and very quick way to create some engaging content, because it's a unique experience. You're getting that connection, and I think you'll see that when we get our demo in a little bit too. So we can talk more about that. If you guys have any questions about these topics, please let us know. I mean, obviously, this has to be a kind of a high-level overview without getting too much into detail. But if you've got specific questions about your industry, we would be happy to help and share more information. I'm going to go ahead, hand it over to Sato right now, and Sato's going to take it from here. Let me just grab Sato's name. Awesome. There you go, Sato. You're our presenter now.
Thanks, Dan. And so, I'm going to talk about education, research, and then we're going to go over to Felix, and he's going to talk about equipment needed. So in the realm of education, remote virtual reality sessions, they can be used for things like students and teachers could interact and explore immersive content together. Teachers or trainers can create learning content and environments. Students could use it to show their work or create projects that can be experienced collaboratively in VR. And if you're wishing to have an entire classroom-sized experience, it may be a bit challenging to have every student have a headset. So one method you could use is if you have like an online meeting platform such as Zoom, you could have a few users that are in the virtual session while the rest of the participants could view that session on a 2D screen. So as long as the online meeting platform gives you the ability to share your screen, then you could just share the mirrored view, because the VR experience, it'll have a mirrored desktop view showing, and so you would share that. And then if you're going to share that, it would be probably more comfortable to share a third-person view, like a bird's eye view, rather than the first-person view, because that could be maybe a bit nauseating to see the first-person view shared. And if bandwidth is an issue for sharing your screen, you could also just place a webcam towards the screen and then show the mirrored view that way. And another option, which I'm showing here, is you could also view people's webcams while you're in the VR session. So this is an example here showing me inside this VR scene, and I'm able to view the webcam while I'm in the scene, so you could interact with other people that are there on their webcams. And so research is a little bit different because it's usually involving the researcher kind of controlling and viewing the experiment, and the participant is in the experience. I mean, obviously, if you want to both be in the experience together, then there's options for that as well, just using like a network communication. But if you're running it where there's the researcher and the participant, it could be a little tricky if you're not in the same location. And so one option is if the application that you're using allows you to save out the data and view that later, then that's one thing that you could do. So I know a lot of people that are here in this presentation might be people that are using our software Vizible. And so just for instance, I wanted to share that as an option, is that you can go and you could publish your Vizible scene as an exe, and then you could send that over to your participant. And with the exe file, you could still print out and save data to like a Excel file or a text file, or then kind of analyze that later on in different ways. And so that's one option that might allow you to continue the research, but obviously if the participant doesn't have like the hardware or the VR headset, then you may have to have them do it in like a desktop view. So that's might be a little bit of limitation there. Another option, say if you're running as a researcher and you want to connect to the person that's experiencing it, you can also use a program like GoToAssist, which will allow you to take control of that remote computer. And so you do the screen sharing option, and that way the researcher not only could see the mirrored window of the participant running through that experience, but then you can go and initiate things like going to the next section of the experiment, kind of initiating things to happen and controlling the experiment while the participant is there. I mean, ideally they would have their own hardware, their own headset, but then obviously, like I said, if they don't, then they would have to be limited to doing it in a 2D desktop mode. And I guess one other thing I wanted to say is, so if this is a time where maybe you're not able to run a study in the way that you want with the right hardware, and so you're still kind of in that holding pattern there, that it could be a time that you could develop your application and test it. And that's another thing I wanted to mention with our software Vizible, is that you could create the whole experience, prototype it in a desktop mode, and then if you later on want to add additional hardware like a tracking system or data gloves or different types of headsets, it actually wouldn't take any more work, because we have this tool called VizConnect, which allows you to specify your hardware, and it automatically works with the existing project. So you could build the whole project in a desktop mode and then later on adapt it to using different hardware without any additional work. And also in the realm of research, I mean, something that is being researched is how effective VR is for remote collaboration. So this is an example at the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford, showing that particular study there. And actually, we're going to launch into our second poll. And so we were interested in knowing what you want to use VR remotely for. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. So go ahead and answer that. I'll give you a minute or two. Okay, so now it should be showing those results. And now I'm going to hand it over to Felix, who's going to talk about the hardware that you will be needing to run remote VR collaboration.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let me turn on my webcam. All right. Hey, everyone. So I'm actually on Santa Barbara here in our headquarters tech lab to show you a couple of things. I will be talking about VR system components. For those of you who attended our last webinar, there's going to be some overlap here. I'm gonna condense it a little bit for those of you who have joined here. I recommend that you go to our YouTube channel and you can watch a previous webinar and other videos there to get more detailed information. So for every VR system, you need at least two components: this display and the motion tracking. For remote collaboration, obviously you need a network connection, and I will talk about those three things. And I guess on the display side, we have the headsets that are very common nowadays, and then projection system. You see that one of those behind me here. On the headset side, there are two categories. One is the standalone headset, which I have an Oculus Go here. It's an older standalone headset because all of our current generations headsets are being used right now with everybody being remote. So the standalone headset have everything that you need built into the headset. So you have the display, obviously, but then also the rendering unit, the tracking system is built in, and of course a communication to your wireless network, for example. Has the advantage of being very cost effective because all you need to buy is the headset and you're already ready to go. Disadvantage is it's not as comfortable to wear because you have the device is fairly heavy compared to other headsets, and compatibility with your application can be an issue because it's running a mobile operating system and not a Windows operating system. So I want to make sure that your application works for a given headset before you go out and buy one. On the PC headset side, I have a HTC Vive here. It looks a lot more clunky than the Oculus Go. It's a lot more comfortable to wear, however, because it's a lot lighter. And you connect it via cable to a PC, which gives you a lot more rendering power, and has the disadvantage that you have the cable. There are obviously nowadays possibilities to get rid of the cable. You can have a wireless adapter, or you can use a backpack PC that's the user just wears on their back, and it's actually fairly hardly noticeable on your back once you have it on. And then I guess on the projection system side, I'm not going to go too much into detail, as I was saying, how those work. Just wanted to point out why is a projection system why are we talking about projection system for remote collaboration? Well, think of a scenario where you have a number of decision makers and on site at your headquarters. Let's say 5 or 10 people that needs to make a decision or design review or a virtual walkthrough given by somebody who is remote, who's not on site. A different example would be trainees. So you have a number of trainees that get trained by a trainer or multiple trainers that are in different parts around the world, and they all together can experience the training, and all they have to do is wear these 3D glasses, and it's not that everybody needs their own headset. All right, and then next up, motion tracking systems. So as I was saying, standalone headsets have the motion tracking built in. It's an inside-out system. Dan mentioned earlier where like your headset like tracks the surrounding area. The HTC Vive, for example, comes with these like lighthouse trackers that get mounted in the room and allow it to track its position. And then we have like a third option there. So for example, we have like on like a higher grade, like a higher precision tracking systems. Like this is like, for example, the head tracker that you can attach to any of the common like commercially available headsets to get essentially like research grade tracking accuracy and precision. All right, on the projection system side, there is no consumer tracking available. Like you need some standalone tracking system, like for example our PPT tracking system here. And then like the third component, like the networking, you might think like, oh, like you need a lot of bandwidth to run a VR application. That is not the case. You need a lot of bandwidth to download all the 3D assets. Depending on how big they are, that might take a while. But once everything is downloaded, it's like local on your PC. All you need to, all the data that is communicated is just like an update of your position and orientation and updates to the scene. And that's fairly, like a fairly small amount of data. What's important though is latency. So similar to like voice over IP, you need to have a fairly low latency, like we recommend less than 30 milliseconds, because like similar to voice over IP, if the break is too long, then people start talking over each other and communication becomes really difficult at that point. One more note, firewall, like a lot of corporations have really strict firewall rules. So you want to make sure that either you're able to open up like like the ports that an application is talking on, or like the alternative that we have used a lot is you can tether off your cell phone, and since the bandwidth requirements are fairly low, that's definitely a valid alternative to having to deal with your IT department to open up ports on your firewall. All right, that was it on the networking side. I'm going to join Dan and Seto in our live presentation of our own software, Vizible. And Dan is going to give us a presentation. So let me fire this up here really quick.
Sure. Let me unmute myself here, just getting this going. So, hey everybody, Dan here again. I'm going to be joining just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a sense of how this is working. I'm in this virtual reality headset. This is an Oculus CV1. Then we've also got Seto. Seto's screen just came on. Seto's actually pointing a webcam at his own desktop right now. So Seto is in desktop view. So as you see me kind of swinging my head back and forth in here, you actually are going to get that sense of my presence. And then we've also got Felix. He's joining on the projection system there in Santa Barbara. That's going to give you another kind of an interesting sort of live view. So this is just a way to illustrate. And then I'm just going to have my camera pointed right at me. So you guys aren't going to see my perspective, but you will see me live and my interactions corresponding to my person there. Felix is in Santa Barbara. Seto is in Anaheim. I'm in Northern California right now. So we are all just going to be joining together for the remote session. So I'm going to go on now. All right. And then just as another heads up, we do have our own audio in here, but we're muted for now, just because I've got the webinar audio and everybody can hear me. So Felix and Sarah, you guys with me here? Hello, good to see you.
Hey, awesome. Dan.
So, and then we got Seto on the desktop as well, so he's also interactive. Let me go ahead, just to kind of situate us for a second here. In Vizible, we have more of a PowerPoint style experience. So we actually use sort of a PowerPoint conceptual model to have slide-based presentation. So Felix and Seto, you guys should be able to see this right here. This is a slide clicker tool. I am able to actually, rather than clicking through slides like I would on a PowerPoint, as we've been showing you guys, I can actually click through slides virtually. And the first slide I'm going to bring up right now is this video slide. So what I can do is I can go ahead and I can grab this video just like this, and I can go ahead and hand it to Felix there. You know, we're about 400 miles away from each other, but Felix can actually pick that up and hold that. So pretty cool experience just in order to pass things around. So it's a nice way to really just, you know, share your content with other people. Let me go ahead and just grab this. So what's cool about Vizible and the way that it works for us is that we are just dropping this pre-existing content directly into a scene. So you're able to really just have this kind of, you know, able to leverage all the material that you already have, videos, things like that, and bring them together. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to click to the next slide here. This is actually more of a virtual trade show for this, and I've got a little bit of limited space here, so I keep kind of checking my my surroundings just to make sure it's all good. So this is our virtual trade show booth. We can actually bring in these product models. So Felix, if you want to go ahead and grab one of those power drills, and it looks like you got the DeWalt. If you want to hand it to me, that's my wall, so you're going to have to get a little closer. Felix has more space than I do because he's in our warehouse. So what's cool about the DeWalt and all of these different drills is that we are actually using photogrammetry models for these. So if you can see here on Felix's screen, we've got this pretty high definition models that we just brought in from Sketchfab. And that really gives you the ability to see the, you know, use a real world object and bring it into VR very quickly. So here we got Sato right here. Hey, Sato. I'm going to go ahead and take us to this next slide, which is showing our 360 video functionality. So Felix, you can actually kind of stick your head into that video right there. Nice, perfect. So this is sort of like a fishbowl experience. Once again, you know, just like any other piece of content, you can just drop it right in on this totally drag and drop world editor. And I'll go ahead and I'll bring up this 360 video. I think when I was looking at this yesterday, it looks pretty darn cool on Felix's screen. That's just exits it out right there. So you guys can see we're actually in a 360 video right now. So it's like that fishbowl experience. What's really cool is we actually have relational position to each other. So I can still see Felix. I can even bring up this laser pointer and I can point it at the world here. And then we can also play this media. I've got a remote, so I can go ahead and play. So now you guys can't hear the music that I'm listening to at this point, but you know, it's kind of a nice scene here, Hawaii. Let me go ahead and pause real fast. But again, you know, Sato's going to talk a little bit more about these 360 videos when we get to his section. But you're able to really just kind of very easily and quickly drop this type of content in. This is just a little sequence here. Earlier I mentioned that we have been sending systems to our clients since we aren't able to meet them in person. This is one way we do that, which is what we call a BizBox. And the animation that you just saw on it, that's just imported directly on the object. But it's actually a system, a fully integrated VR system that we just put in the box and can ship anywhere. It's already set up. And then Felix, since you got a little bit more space, you mind going ahead and grabbing that avatar recording for me? So what's cool about this, one more time. There we go. So Felix is interacting with this user interface up here. You guys can't hear what this robot avatar is saying right now, but you know, you might, if you're a virtual instructor, if you're doing virtual learning, virtual training, we have the ability to actually put a headset on and record yourself as an avatar live, interacting with content, and then you can go ahead and bring that back later. So that's just a nice way to really shortcut the experience in terms of not always having to have a live presenter, being able to have a show and then tell type or show and then do experience, right? So when we're doing training, we'll have a person come in, show you how it works, and then do it afterwards. So we go ahead, and this is kind of our last sequence here. So we've got the 747 coming down from the ceiling, and that is kind of an anachronism right now, right? I mean, we're not taking airplanes like we used to, but let me go ahead and come over here, and I will take out this piece of the engine, and then this piece of the engine, And if you guys have ever seen any of our marketing videos, you might have seen a sequence similar to this in our videos. So it's kind of fun to just show this. I think what's really awesome about this sequence is it really illustrates the difference between learning in a two-dimensional space versus learning in a three-dimensional space. Felix, can you grab me my favorite slide back there, the third PDF back? So Felix, these are just regular PDF documents that Felix is interacting with. And then I can grab this PDF document. What's really cool about this is that this part of the engine diagram corresponds with actually this part of the actual engine, the 3D model of it. So then what I can do is if I'm trying to illustrate to a user what it looks like when you are having this jet fuel get injected into the space, what I can do is I can actually draw an illustration of that. So this is the way that the jet fuel is being injected. And you know, if you look at this diagram, this two-dimensional context, it's really hard to translate that into this three-dimensional space right here. But when you've got this virtual reality kind of learning space, it really makes that a lot more impactful because you're really, you know, like we were saying earlier, ecological validity, right? This is much closer to real life. So yeah, I mean, it's a really fun way. I think hopefully for you guys at home, like that this is an engaging experience as well. Like Sato was saying, not everybody has to have a VR headset in order to share a virtual reality experience. So let me go ahead. I'm going to clear that, and I'm going to go ahead. We're pretty much at the very end of our presentation here. The last thing that we have in this space is just another video that shows how Presentation Designer works. We won't let that whole thing play out. We've got plenty of content online about how Presentation Designer, it's a fully drag and drop. There's no programming. So you're just bringing in your assets, whether it's PDFs, videos, 3D models that you got off Sketchfab. You just drop them right in the scene, schedule a session, people join you. It's a pretty straightforward experience. We really tried to make it as easy as like a Microsoft PowerPoint level of difficulty. And then also kind of like a GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar style. You create a session, join for remote meetings. So that's really I think, wrapping it up for our demo at this point. I'm going to jump out of the headset so I can see you guys again. Hello. And then I'm going to go ahead, and you guys don't have to watch me anymore, so I'm going to stop sharing my webcam. I think we'll have Felix.
Yeah.
Felix is going to go ahead and, all right, handing it over to, back to Sato here.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So that was our live demo there. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit, just really quickly, about building a VR application for remote collaboration and just kind of like some of the things that you might need. So the first thing that you're probably going to need for putting together an application is some 3D assets. So, I mean, these could be like 3D models or 360 videos or images or scan data. And so some places to get 3D models. So there's Sketchfab, if you've not heard of that, is a very good online content library that allows you to access over 150,000 Creative Commons free models that you can use in your research or experiments. And it's really easy just to download a model from there, and you could download, they're all now converted to GLTF, which is a model format that will come across very consistently into different programs, including our software, Wizard and Visible. Obviously, you can also create 3D models in a program like 3D Studio Max or Blender, Maya, things like that. And another thing that you could do now is if you need, if you have like real world objects that you want to then bring into a 3D scene, is you can use something called photogrammetry. And this just basically you go and take a bunch of snapshots, bunch of photos of an object from all different angles, and then you use a software like Metashape or Autodesk Remake, and then you can, that software will automatically stitch that object into a 3D model. And you could do this with environments as well. So we have actually, our whole office in Santa Barbara now has been scanned and put into 3D environments using that exact technique. I mean, you're going to want probably some avatars. I mean, whether that's representing yourself as a tracked avatar or maybe an agent or a bot that's representing an AI avatar in your scene. And some options you could look into for that would be like Mixamo is one where you could get a lot of like free avatars, and Mixamo also has a conversion tool where you can upload and any avatar that's in the T-pose, and it'll automatically convert it and rig it up, which is kind of cool. Or you could use a program like Character Creator is a really good one. That's the shot I have here. Make Human. Rocketbox actually just now added the ability to use a Rocketbox avatars. So there's a GitHub where you can get those again and use those for your research. If you have an avatar that can be converted to the FBX format, then that'll be a pretty good way to get the skeleton in there, and our software will work with it if it's FBX. Obviously, 360 videos and images, it's really simple now to use either a 360 camera like the Gear 360, which I think is about $100, or like a more professional one like the Insta Pro 2, or you could even use your phone and just capture like a photosphere, which you can use the photosphere mode, and then you'll have a 360 image or 360 video. And now just really quickly to talk about some of the software. So this is Vizible, which is our remote collaboration tool, and it's designed for no coding, so you just kind of drag and drop your objects in there, and then over here on the left we have what we call slides, which kind of allows you to guide someone through the scene. Like you as the presenter can click through the slides, and then you just schedule this like a go-to meeting, so you send out the attendee an invite and they can go and meet you in VR. And another cool thing about this is you can actually run this as you're building a presentation. You can both be there in the scene building it together, and you could manipulate objects, place things where you want them to be, and do kind of like an editing session, which also allows you to create collaboratively, which is another cool element to that. Wizard is a Python-based program. It's more built for researchers. It has the ability to bring in all the different Python libraries, and it easily connects to a very large variety of hardware, and so motion tracking systems, eye tracking, data gloves. We actually have some eye tracking templates specific with Wizard, so you can go and easily create eye tracking experiments that way. To run Wizard remotely, you can use either the clustering, which is part of that program that can allow you to run a local network, or if you're going to connect remotely, then you would use a VPN, or it also has embedded networking tools. And then for some really quick overview on just some other online kind of multi-user platforms, so that's AltSpace, which is like a virtual meeting space where users can like watch movies, play games together, chat. There's a VR Chat, started in 2017. It's a massive multiplayer VR platform, and it has extensive support for a large number of hardware configurations, and it's gained some popularity due to Twitch streaming and YouTube videos showing this. Is Big Screen, which is basically just kind of like watching movies together or playing games. And as Dan had talked about, Mozilla Hubs, which is an open source VR chat room that kind of allows you to create your own rooms and invite friends. And now really quickly, I just wanted to show you how simple you could actually make a VR session and jump in remotely. So for instance, you go to Sketchfab, download the GLTF, open up our Vizible software, you unzip the model that you downloaded from Sketchfab, open up the presentation designer, upload the GLTF model, create a new blank scene, drag in the model, and then you just schedule your session and you send this out to whoever you want to jump into VR with. They'll get a link that allows them to download the software. You start the scene as presenter, they start as attendee, put in the ID that you gave them, click sign in, and that's it. That's basically the easiest way to start a VR remote session. So yeah, so that's just a brief overview of kind of some of the things you need for building an application. I think at this point we're going to go into our third poll, so I'm going to launch that really quick. So this is, how likely are you to use virtual reality for your work or business? I'll give you another 30 seconds here. Okay, and now I'm going to hand it over to Matthias, who's going to talk about where we see the future of VR collaboration going.
So hi everybody, here's Matthias. I'm the last in the row here, and I got 3 minutes to the hour left, so I'll keep my section short. I hope you all can hear me. As you probably have noticed, we are as a company obviously super excited about the potential in VR, and we really do think that virtual reality will change the world. We think that there has been kind of a lot of over expectation in the kind of recent hype of virtual reality. But at the same time, we do think that long term, like virtual reality will have a huge impact on how things are done. So let me see if I can bring the next slide here. Oops, sorry guys. As far as current adoption goes, like obviously the whole need for socially distancing has really triggered renewed interest in using virtual reality as a tool to bridge that gap that results out of not being able to meet in reality anymore. And so we get a lot of inquiries right now. Oh, can I do a trade show remotely in VR? Can I teach my class in VR? And along those lines. This is also one of the reasons we have this webinar here. We are trying to really educate like a lot of people right now about what we think the capabilities of VR currently are. And we're also trying to understand or teach others like what we have found to be limitations in virtual reality. But in general, like clearly the readiness for using VR has majorly grown simply because of the need of the current situation that a lot of people experience. The obstacles for adoption that we see have already lined out really well by my colleague Felix, which are mostly like real world obstacles that you also have when you try to have a phone call or a Zoom meeting with a bunch of people. It's simply connectivity is not actually as good as people all want it to be. Then obviously not everybody has a high-end VR headset and computer at home. And last but not least, some of those VR headsets are still early on in their development cycle. So the drivers are not as stable as someone would maybe want them to be. And sometimes there was frequent updates to be made. So you might have a VR session and you might realize that you need to update your Oculus or Windows mixed reality driver before it even works. So these things are obstacles. As Felix pointed out, also firewalls and corporations can be an obstacle. But right now with working from home, we don't see that too much because working from home actually is pretty good for VR. But with all these obstacles, the interest in working together obviously is really growing right now. The one thing that clearly is going to make it a lot better to work together in VR is when 5G is rolled out for everybody. But as we all know, 5G will take a long time to be rolled out because it just takes a lot of access points. It takes a lot of more antennas everywhere for having a good 5G coverage. So like 5G will help, but it's going to gradually really be accessible to people all over the world over the next 5 to 10 years. So that's going to be a longer time frame. Just a quick word also on augmented reality, because people always separate augmented reality and virtual reality in ways that are not necessarily necessary. Augmented reality just means that you are combining elements of the real world, like you basically seeing some of the real world and you're seeing some computer generated stuff on top of that kind of. That's what people usually mean with augmented reality. The augmented reality combines real world elements and a CG computer generated elements. And from our perspective, augmented reality is really just a sliding scale with virtual reality. Like an augmented reality headset can work equally for a virtual reality meeting than a virtual reality headset. The main difference is that virtual reality is typically really placing you and the people who are joining you in the virtual reality. You're fully wrapped in, you don't see reality anymore. And in augmented reality, everybody is still kind of in his own like real reality. So there's still elements that are individually different for the participants. But in general, augmented reality headsets can be used for virtual and augmented reality collaboration almost the same way as we use virtual reality headsets, just to say that. It's just a matter of like, what do you want to get out of it? Then last but not least, obviously the hardware is advancing. The wave of virtual reality was started by Palmer Luckey and Oculus, and I have to give huge credit for for that to Oculus and Parmalucky, that they've been driving it in such a way, and finally Facebook came in and the whole wave got started. But it got started in like 2012, 2013, and really accelerated 2013, 2014 when Facebook jumped in. And so we don't really have like a long consumer history with VR yet, and a lot of these hardware pieces are still evolving. And we see advances now. The eye tracking starts to be integrated. So the HTC Vive Pro Eye is now a professional HMD that has eye tracking just right in there, which is great. And then ultimately, obviously, everybody wants to have also the focal adjustment to be done automatically. Like currently, all head-mounted displays have a fixed focal plane, which means you still have some kind of a somewhat artificial feeling of when you're in a headset, because you always have to keep your eyes parallel. You don't do that like kind of by doing it actively, you're just doing it passively. But matter-of-factive headsets are like still a little bit different from the reality, but that is something that can also be fixed when eye tracking is in there. And from all we know, Facebook and Oculus already have some prototypes, and there's other companies who have prototypes that fix for some or all of that focal adjustment issue. And so last but not least, rendering power also is going to be potentially somewhat decentralized. Like there's talk about when the 5G is rolled out that there could be rendering graphics cards in the 5G access points, which means you don't have to have the rendering in your consumer side device anymore. You could just literally have the stuff rendered for you in an access point that's close by, so you don't have any latency. And if that happens, that would also make virtual reality a lot better and much easier, because what that means for the end users, then the device you'd be wearing is a lot lighter and the battery lasts a lot longer. And so ultimately that will also help drive adoption when you have just a little tiny device you can put on at any time you need it. But so that's really what we see right now. We are super excited. We think there is a lot of potential of virtual reality for the next 5 to 10 years. And we think the world will certainly somewhat like wrap around the capabilities that this technology has and use it for what it's good for. And I think this is the end here of my section. So I'm handing back over to Dan, who is going to jump in a few questions that we have taken out of the many questions that you guys have asked. And then we'll just jump in and answer some of those questions on the fly as much as we can. And we'll certainly answer every question individually as well. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining again for this webinar. I'm going to send out one last poll really fast, just as we get into this Q&A. If you guys don't mind contributing one more time. So this poll is asking, what do you think is the most important feature of a remote collaboration app for VR? So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to answer that. And looking forward to hearing you all what your feedback is here. You know, trying to take in the public perspective on these different pieces right now. One of the I'm also going to get into the questions. I think we're going to try and answer most of the questions here, or at least to the best of my ability. We'll also be following up with other questions afterwards. And we will be having a survey. And that survey, you know, that's your opportunity to let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see more of in the future. And we are really, you know, trying to follow up with every single person who's reaching out to us individually and giving you guys a really, you know, sincere and detailed answer here. So we'd love to hear from you guys. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share that poll now. Thank you all for those who participated. Really great to see this kind of spectrum here. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just start talking about some of these questions that we got. So first question we got is, what type of API are you providing for applications running and using the HMD for engineering design? I think, you know, just answering that question sort of briefly, our program Vizard provides a really nice API in terms of having the ability to write your own plugins, things like that. You know, being able to customize your experience. but it's not really, it's more of a simulation engine than it is a design tool, right? Vizible, on the other hand, just to be totally upfront, is a completely drag and drop system. It's just like PowerPoint, right? So PowerPoint doesn't really have an API. Vizible is also a what you see is what you get type software. So if you're bringing in, engineering content, what you can do is you can bring in converted CAD models, things like that, and have people discuss and work on them together in terms of just, a show and tell type experience. But is it at the point where I'm having, a dynamic AutoCAD collaborative experience where we're building something together right now? And our tools are not at that point. And I'm not sure that there are any tools that are at that point right now either. I haven't encountered them personally. But if you have any more questions about that or want us to send you, free trial of Vizard or anything like that, we'd be happy to help you out in that regard. Question number 2. This is actually something I meant to talk about during the remote VR for design review, and that is, how do I get these CAD models into a program? And the answer to that is that different programs have a different level of ease of use for this. Our system traditionally is more on the having to come in and reduce the total number of polygons for a CAD model because of the requirements of a real-time rendering environment. A real-time rendering environment means that, a really heavy model, something complex like a CAD model, isn't going to run, at the frame rate that you need it to run in order to have a smooth virtual reality experience. The really good news is that there's a ton of new tools coming out right now that make it super easy. There are direct viewers for Revit where you can just kind of plug your headset in and look at it. It doesn't really have those cool collaboration features that we were showing. But to get something into a projection VR system specifically, there's some really nice and easier ways now. One of them is the GLTF model that Seda was talking about. You can really just actually export as a GLTF model these days, or use Sketchfab as an intermediary, and it'll automatically convert your model into that format, which is then just natively accepted by Vizible, Vizard, Sketchfab, and a whole host of other different tools, including Mozilla Hubs, which is also natively using GLTF. So all of these, I think, there's always been this kind of push to try to get universal file types, but that more than ever is a requirement of people these days, because these CAD systems just weren't set up for virtual reality. So it's definitely been, I think, one of the biggest barriers to entry in the industry, but it's something that we're definitely working to address as much as we can. The next question here is, how can projection VR be used for remote collaboration? Some people in a group, then a few remotely. And this is also a really good question. I think it's good that you're talking about the helicopter rotor disassembly, because the reason why I would see projection VR being used in a remote context is really for group learning experience. A headset's always going to give you a little bit more of an immersive experience, unless you have one of these like crazy, $1 million cave systems where you've got the type of overhead and floor projection. But our kind of projection VR style front projected systems don't usually have a floor and a ceiling. So you're not going to get the same kind of level of, if I look up at the ceiling, I'm seeing my actual ceiling, whereas when you've got a headset on, it's going to be a little bit more immersive, just because you can look all the way around. But the big difference is that when you've got a projection system, you're actually having a group experience. That wouldn't necessarily be remote, in the days of these sort of social distancing, that projection system doesn't really, you have everybody crowded together in the space, but not necessarily 6 feet apart. But when we are back in person, when we're all shaking hands and hugging again, I think, that's where the projection VR system is really awesome, is that you have all of these people together. So and they're all viewing and experiencing 3D content together as well. So for a remote session, if you imagine Felix, who's practicing social distancing right now, if he had 5 people with him and they were all wearing 3D glasses, they would all be getting the presentation that I was giving from my bedroom here with the Oculus. they would all be seeing that, and whether I was giving them a training session or something like that, that would be the context where you've got a group of people in a room, and you want to give them all the same kind of remote training experience where the subject matter expert is, somewhere else physically. So that would be, I think, the way that we would recommend using this in a remote context. The same thing could be said of the kind of like sales and marketing presentations that we do. A projection system is really just an awesome way of sharing content with a group of people. You can share 2D content as well as 3D content. It can really just be kind of like a large home theater experience as well. And then also obviously jump into that 3D immersive space. So anything where you've got a group of people who are trying to benefit from a 3D model viewing experience, then that's where I'm seeing the projection VR being a really valuable addition. This next question is also an interesting question, I think. Are there good tools for collaboration in terms of manipulating objects in a shared VR space, but not just reviewing and talking, but actually building? So this is kind of like a long-term vision, I think, of VR. There was a concept movie that was released, I think, like almost 2 decades ago about the future of VR being a place where you're just pointing at a blank world and, walls are popping up and you're just, building a city out of, basically nothing. And there are some really cool tools that allow you to do that. The ones that pop to my mind are the ones that I have experience with, which are like Quill, Medium, Tilt Brush. All of these are like more artistic apps. I know for a fact that Medium, we have our artists in-house will actually use Medium to sculpt prototype models, which you can then actually add to another VR space. How multi-user these things are at the moment, it really remains to be seen. I don't know that any of them are natively collaborative. I will say that with our own Visible platform, you do have the ability to live drop content into a person. It's called an editing session. So what you guys saw Felix and myself doing earlier was like a scheduled session. But what we can do is we can actually have an editing session where one of the participants is in the application editor, which is called Presentation Designer, and they're able to actually live drop models and things into the people who are already in the VR. It's not exactly like, all of us in the VR together building with, Legos exactly, but it is giving you the ability to make adjustments on the fly, make some kind of, bring in new content. And then I think there's other tools like that. Mozilla Hubs, for example, and I just talked to that because I've had a lot of experience with it recently. But it's a way you can actually pull up like a GLTF importer, and while you're in the VR, like bring in models dynamically or pictures or whatever you have. So both Visible and Hubs are capable of that kind of on-the-fly content editing. But in terms of like, building, like the CAD experience that I was describing earlier, I don't know that that's out there yet. I personally haven't seen it. We'll look around, and if we find something, we'll let you know. But thanks for that question. I think it's definitely a space that we're moving towards right now. Last few questions here, and then we'll let you guys go. Thanks again for everybody who stuck around through the Q&A. And we'll also follow up with this, obviously, with the survey and everything as well. But first question here is your tool applicable to immersive conferencing? And if yes, what would the advantage in comparison with Zoom? So I tried to answer that a little bit earlier in the idea of like, why would you want to use this instead of a basic VR or a basic video conferencing solution? And the answer is, if you're just having a normal tag-up meeting, I don't think that you would want to use VR for that. The value of VR is really in if you and I have to have a conversation about something 3D, or if there is some requirement for us to have a more personalized experience with each other where we can actually see physical representation of each other's bodies, get some kind of, idea of each other's physicality, gestures, things like that. I would say it's a lot more of a natural experience talking with a person one-on-one or with multiple people in a VR space. But is it always going to be the right substitute for Zoom? Not necessarily. What's kind of cool is that you can actually have 1 or 2 people in VR and then have a Zoom meeting going on at the same time. And just like we did earlier, sharing the screen, showing what's going on in the VR space to create a more immersive, lesson or meeting or something along those lines. I think that's something that people should be looking at right now as a way to get your feet wet. Like, how can I involve my students? How can I involve people, who aren't with me here in the space, and doing a screencast of a VR experience or recording yourself in a VR experience and then having that on YouTube. Those are awesome ways to use this technology right now. And yeah, so I think that's another thing to just keep in mind. In terms of this next question, can you elaborate the exe publishing option more? What kind of file? That's an executable file, so .exe. But Sato, I know we had a long conversation about this just the other day, about how this topic is really deserving of its own, at least a blog post. Because as you guys may or may not know, many of our customers are academic researchers. So we're really going to try and put together some resources for you all in the academic research world about how you can just creative ideas for doing science in VR remotely during the time of social distancing. So that's definitely a topic that we're going to try and generate some content around in the next couple of weeks here. Next question here is, what is the weight on internet bandwidth when using tools? When using tools such as Vizible. And Felix spoke to that a little bit. Like we said, we can actually use a cell phone to, if you have a really, I know for a fact that my local internet has been kind of going up and down as people are working from home, and really, putting a strain on the system. But you can actually use a cell phone as a hotspot. The one major caveat with any kind of VR content experience, typically what's happening is all of the assets are being downloaded ahead of time. So when Felix joined our VR meeting, it wasn't the first time he joined the VR meeting. All of those assets had been downloaded and installed on the computer before he joined. And that's because all of the rendering is taking place locally on the computer. All that you're transmitting over VR is the position and voice of a person and their interactions with objects. So the requirement in meeting is not that high for bandwidth, but if you've tried to download a 3 gigabyte file while you've only got 0.2 megabit speed for download because everybody's watching Netflix at the same time, you'll know that can actually be a big barrier right there. So what you really want to do when you're doing a VR meeting is give yourself plenty of time ahead of the meeting itself to download the assets. In meeting, not so much of a big deal, but you're downloading a small video game in many cases when you're joining a VR session. So if you've got a PlayStation at home and you know how that works, then it's really a similar experience. How can I get access to 3D Assets Library for Projection VR? Great question. We actually, for those of you who sign up for the Vizible free trial, you'll actually get access to a 3D Asset Library that we have online. As a download. It's got 200 objects or so in it. We use quite a bit Sketchfab. It's an awesome resource. If you guys check that out, it's kind of I like to think of it almost as an Instagram for 3D models, because it's really community oriented in the way that it's generating content. Many people are posting models on Sketchfab for free. So for researchers, it's a great resource. There's other types of paid model sites out there too. TurboSquid is a really traditional one, and those are just places where you can go out and get your 3D models. Traditionally, we've relied on a really sophisticated art department that we have here at WorldViz. We use 3ds Max. We actually maintain our own exporter for 3ds Max. So that's where a lot of our in-house content is coming from. Maybe one of these other resources, and then going through even a higher level of optimization with an artist in-house. So if you have 3D artists or access to 3D art resources, that is definitely, I think, a cornerstone of creating good VR content in-house, is having a good artist, as always. And then just finally, what is the system option that allowed collaboration between Felix and Dan? Felix was on a projection system. I was just on my traditional Oculus One CV1 here. I was on a gaming laptop, and Felix was on a pretty sophisticated machine, because projection VR requires a lot in terms of rendering, at least a quadro card. But really, to do the kind of collaboration that Felix and I were doing, you could get started with a laptop that's really, any laptop that's suitable for playing a video game. Minimum card of like a GTX 970, if you know what that is. That as a minimum card, and then an Oculus, the new Oculus is, I believe, $400. I could be wrong about that, but the Oculus Rift S, and it's even more, I think, self-contained than the old Oculus has these little cameras that I'm looking at right now, that are tracking your position, but the new Oculus has cameras built into the headset. So, I mean, for not very much, you can get a super robust VR system, which is just a laptop and a headset, and you're ready to roll. If you have two of those, then that's great. You can make that connection with people. But I would just recommend, if you're really trying to jump into this VR world, the Oculus Rift S, for just basic collaboration, is really the minimum that you need to get started, and that with just a decent gaming laptop. I'm not talking about a $2,000 gaming laptop. You can get one for, I think even under $1,000 if it's on sale. That will work really well for VR. Just look for the little VR ready, or Google VR ready laptop, and they won't lead you wrong there. So yeah, I think that's covering pretty much everything that we had to talk about today. Let's see what time it is. 10:24. Excellent. So thank you all for sticking with us here. Really appreciate all of your attention and time. We hope that you enjoyed this webinar. We will be reaching out with this survey after this is over. We'd love for you guys to subscribe to our email mailer, check out our website, let us know what you think we're doing right, let us know what we can actually improve. I think what we're really trying to be right now is a resource for learning in the VR world as much as anything else. So if there's something that you guys are thinking, hey, it would be great if you guys could speak to this, we would love to hear that feedback. And once again, just thank you guys so much for coming and joining us, and keep your eyes on your email inboxes, because we're going to try and do another one of these probably in the near future. Definitely takes a little bit of effort, as we all know, to put these together with our team here. So I'm not sure when our next one's scheduled for, but we'll be trying to do one again soon, I'm sure.
We're doing one
again,
next week. We're going to be contributing a webinar with our BioPack partner. So we're going to be showing actually some VR examples using physiological measurements, and showing a little bit more about Vizard and kind of ways that that's integrated with physiological measurements in BioPack. And that's on Thursday, April 22nd at 8 a.m. So that's next week, 8 a.m. Pacific time.
Awesome. Yeah. So we'll send out some more information about that. BioPack is a partner company of ours. They are also based out of Santa Barbara, and they do physiological data measurements. So heart rate, skin conductance, EEG, and our software ties in really closely with theirs. So Sato is going to be giving a super detailed demo on Vizard, and also what does it look like when, some really cool stuff like how heart rate can actually impact your VR experience. So, you can actually have the biofeedback data go directly into the VR to impact the experience. So that's a pretty cool topic. We'll send out some more information on that soon. And yeah, thanks again for everyone. Anybody else, Matthias, Felix, Sato? Thank you guys all so much for presenting. Thank you, Belle and Bettina, in the background, for fielding the questions and the chat and everything. And anybody else have anything to say before we shut this thing down?
Yeah, thank you all for attending.
Perfect. Thank you all. Have a great day.